got to understand, too, coming from Denver back to the South.
Right.
I mean, when I left for Denver, I'd been living in Atlanta and Athens, which they're not exactly small towns, at least not anymore. And it had been a long time since I'd actually lived in the rural South or been and spent any time in the rural South. It was all school for me, and then I left and went out west. And that return, sort of to the Southeast, and all the culture, all those things that you think you hate, you don't realize how much you miss them until you move away. Coming back really helped the songwriting process. It was magic for me.
Welcome to Curious Goldfish, a podcast community where music and curiosity come together through interesting conversations with the music makers of our world. I'm your host, Jason English. You can find Curious Goldfish on all the major podcast and social media platforms, and of course, we have all of our content on our website, curiousgoldfish.com. Today we're spending time with Matt Killough, who currently lives in Nashville but can claim Florida, Georgia, and Alabama as part of his heritage. Matt is a great example of why I wanted to do this podcast, to meet interesting people who have fascinating stories to tell. I hope you find that's the case in my conversation with him. Since speaking with him at the 38 Songwriters Festival in Florida, Matt was recognized by Nashville Scene as one of 10 artists to watch. It's recognition well-deserved, and I'm sure there will be more in the coming months and years. We covered a bunch of topics, including sources of inspiration for his first album. And just wait until you hear some of that, as well as his borderline obsession with British folk artists. It's not every day you meet someone from the Deep South who can also go deep on someone like Nick Drake. Grateful that Matt played some songs too, including Birds of Crenshaw County off that first album, which we hear a lot about, but also an unreleased tune called Poor Prometheus, a nod to Matt's interest in Greek mythology. If you enjoy the episode, please give Matt a follow on Instagram and Spotify. His last name is spelled Killough. Let's dive in. I'm talking with Matt Killough down here at the 38 Songwriter Music Festival in Florida. Matt, thanks for your time.
Very welcome. Glad to be here.
Is this your first year playing at the show?
This is, yeah. Never been down here for this before.
But you've been into the area, right?
Oh, yeah. We, like you say, my hometown's only about a maybe 2.5 hour drive from here, so we were down here all the time. My mom learned to water ski in the bay, and my dad used to come down here all the time water skiing with his buddies. Our families used to spend a lot of time, 3-4 trips a year probably.
Yeah, it's a nice area. Today's not so much, but
yeah.
This festival is crazy. We were here last year just as fans, and it's just different because there's, 30 venues, 175 artists. How did you get involved?
To be honest, I wasn't that familiar with it, but my best friend's parents live down here now, and they've been pushing me to do it for years. And this year, his father sent some of my music and an album review to the guys that organized the thing, and they essentially said they'd take me if I applied. He forwarded me that email and essentially put it in my lap, and I couldn't turn him down on that after he did all the legwork.
That's amazing. I'm
glad I did it. It's been great thus far.
Yeah, the number of artists that are down here is really good. I guess, do you plan to make connections sort of officially, unofficially with people? Or is it just
as much as we can, like you say, with the weather and everything else. And then today I've been kind of tied up. But it's funny, I know the guy that's playing after me at the Hilton, Tim Easton. He's a Nashville guy.
Oh, right.
And I've run into him several times around town. And I know some other folks that are down here. I feel like half the people that are here are probably living in Nashville in some capacity. But yeah, much as I can, I'd like to, and we'll definitely be out and about more tomorrow, have some more free time.
Your backstory, can you just give us some headlines, where you're from? It sounds like you live in Nashville now.
Yeah, I was born in Tallahassee, Florida, but my parents at the time were living in Bainbridge, Georgia, which is a tiny little town, sort of in the southwest corner, right near the Alabama and Florida borders. My dad and my mom were both from South Alabama, and he moved over to Bainbridge to take a coaching job, and he's a teacher till he retired a few years back. I went to high school in Bainbridge, went to a small college there, and then went up to UGA after that and graduated, lived in Athens for a while, lived in Atlanta, went to Emory for grad school, was there for about three and a half years. And then after that, I moved to Denver, and I was in Denver for 12. And I moved to Nashville in 18, and I've been there ever since. Most of my family, almost all of them, are from Alabama, either Sylacauga, Talladega area, or South Alabama. So,
how long have you been into music? Did that start pretty early?
Well, I always loved music. I didn't really pick up a guitar until my middle brother brought one home. I think they had one sitting in the band room at the high school that nobody was using. One of Ben's friends had said, hey, you should start playing. He brought it home, tried it for a little while, and just didn't pick it up again. But I kept messing around with it. Kind of grew from there really slowly. High school, I played here and there, but I was mostly into electric stuff like most kids are. It's rock and roll. College, I really started getting more into the acoustic stuff. I was a big Led Zeppelin fan. And it's those kind of British folk tunes, those acoustic numbers and the altered tunings between the really big heavy songs that Jimmy Page does that captivated me. And when I heard him playing that kind of stuff, it's like, man, I have to know how he's doing this. And it took me forever to figure out that it wasn't in standard tuning. So I was trying to make it work, and it just wouldn't. And it was so frustrating. But from there, it's like, you just start kind of getting into the other British folk guys, Bert Jansch and early John Martin and some of those guys. Nick Jones has been a big one for me here lately, and Roy Harper and guys like that. Robin Williamson from Incredible String Band. I don't know if you ever listened to his early stuff.
Oh, wow.
But blew my mind. He plays in this weird C minor tuning. It sounds so witchy. It's very very strange, but I don't know. That's the stuff that really kind of made me want to put down an electric and pick up an acoustic, and I sort of haven't been back, really.
Are you familiar with Nick Drake at all?
Oh, dude, love him. Found out about him in college. Pink Moon was on a car commercial, like Volkswagen or something.
That's right.
And he had this huge resurgence, and he was on, I went to watch Garden State when I was in grad school with a girlfriend of mine, and they had a Nick Drake song there too, and so it's just always kind of blown away by what he was doing. Nobody else sounds like that, and he uses more open tunings than anybody I've ever seen. Every song he does is in a different tuning. I can't imagine sitting there watching him live, because most of the show would have been him turning pegs, but he's great, and I've tried to mess around with some of his stuff, and it is endlessly frustrating. Like, he's a virtuoso, and I don't even know, I wouldn't know where to start.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you said that. I don't know if I've ever heard somebody even try to cover him.
Man, if you get on YouTube, there's English guys that do it. Like, they can play it note for note. There's a guy from Indiana, Josh Turner, I think is his name. He has played more Nick Drake songs, covered more on YouTube than anybody I've seen, and he plays them note for note. I think he was a music major in college, but it's not easy. It's really not. There's another guy, Chris Brain is his name, and he's from Leeds area, I think, and he sounds similar in a way to Nick Drake on some of the stuff that he does, and he's covered a lot of Nick Drake stuff, just on YouTube. But yeah, you should check those out if you haven't seen them. It's crazy to see it in person.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'll do that. So tell me about Athens. Obviously, that's a famous hub of all sorts of bands and stories and venues and everything. What kind of influence did that have?
Well, it's funny, when I first showed up there, all I cared about was post-punk, I was kind of in the moment, and Zeppelin and the Stones, and there was this Zeppelin cover band called Zoso, and they may still be around. I tried to catch them in Denver one time, and it sold out. that far away. I couldn't believe it. But in the Southeast, they had a dedicated following, and I was there for every show they played, no matter what. Even if I was alone, I was going.
Wow.
And there was a cover band when I was there called Sticky Fingers that was a pretty good Stones cover band. But other than that, though, I roomed with a guy from my hometown that first summer, and he had a fairly extensive cable plan, and he had VH1 Classic. And at the time, they were playing old school like post-punk bands like Split Enz and some of the stuff from The Cure, Susie and the Banshees, stuff like that. And I would sit on the couch all day and watch that stuff. At the time, old B-52s and REM and all that stuff, living there was almost cliche. But now, if I find a jukebox, a lot of times that's what I put on. But I wish I'd had more time there.
Yeah.
I had this kind of life pivot, this changing moment where I was sitting in this Kaplan class trying to get ready for the MCAT, and it was right across the street from the Georgia Theater. And I saw these people lining up for these shows day after day, and I was just absolutely despondent, like, what am I doing here? And it made me so sad. And I finally, at the end of the summer, right as I was getting ready to take the test, I burnt out, and I got over it, and I had to call my parents and say, look,
oh boy,
I'm sorry, I don't think I can do this. And they were very patient. All right, we understand, but you gotta come up with something else, because there's 3 kids coming behind you that we have to help. That was kind of one of those moments. I went into to physician assistant school instead. Right. It probably salvaged my sanity, kept me from going off the deep end, and allowed time for music, because you're talking about 8 years of med school at least. I don't know if I'd have had any music left in me if I had done that.
Yeah, that's a lot. So tell us about your album. Where'd it come from? How long did you? The stories behind that.
That's the thing about first albums is, they say you have your entire life to write your first one. You got years and years and years, and it's sort of a compilation of everything that you've done up to that point, and you just pick what you want, whatever fits, I guess. It's that second one that gets you, where you're on a timetable. It's like, all right, well, can you really come up with other material, or pick some material that you had before, if you got enough left. For me, it was, that album is a combination of songs that I wrote when I was in Denver, which just a couple of them, weren't many of those left. And then songs that I wrote when I first moved to Nashville. And my sister and her husband live near Talladega. They live in Pell City. Her husband, my brother-in-law, Zach, he worked on a hunting preserve and like a clay course, So every time I went down there to see him, I would spend all day out there with him. It was so much fun, just even if he was doing maintenance stuff or whatever. And occasionally they'd let me get out and shoot. And there were people that he worked with that were a lot of fun. I went fishing with them several times. A lot of those interactions and that setting really fed into the album, and it became kind of a origin story, I guess, with my family and where we had lived and all that stuff, how my parents were brought up and what I had been through and all that. And it just came together really well. Those, times visiting them in Sylacauga and Talladega really sort of cemented the whole thing for me. And there's the old cemeteries. We went off in the woods. I mean, this place, and he had to ask around about it. It was so overgrown. It was off the side of the road. You can't see any of it. But after hacking through all this vegetation and everything else, you get to these old stones. They're only about that tall and, really small. But yeah, there's people with my last name buried back in the woods. This used to be a cemetery, and it's just stuff like that. Put all that sort of in a new light for me, really brought it to the forefront, and it made it easy, man. All of it came together really well.
And it's called Siloam?
Siloam, yeah. Siloam is a Siloam Baptist, or so they say, like I say down there, they say Siloam, but Siloam Baptist Church, which is in South Alabama. And there's a cemetery there with a bunch of my relatives buried in it. And so it's kind of an important spot for us. My dad always talked about it. It's just my great-grandfather was the one, or great-great-grandfather was the one to move from central Alabama, sort of hill country, down to South Alabama. We think it was because he was farming and the land was cheaper, but all bets are off. Like there's no telling.
So you said it was pretty easy to have it come together. Was the songwriting the easy part, or what?
Well, to be honest, you got to understand too, coming from Denver back to the South. Right. I mean, when I left for Denver, I'd been living in Atlanta and Athens, which they're not exactly small towns, at least not anymore. And it had been a long time since I'd actually lived in the rural South, or been and spent any time in the rural South. It was all school for me, and then I left and went out west. And that return, sort of to the Southeast, when all the culture, all those things that you think you hate, you don't realize how much you miss them until you move away. Coming back really helped the songwriting process. It was magic for me. The other thing about moving back to the Southeast and Nashville in particular is that you are hit with all this traditional music, as soon as you hit the city limits. And when I moved there, I was more traditional country. I mean, that was what we were listening to out west. And they had a good scene for that in Denver. But when I was in the process of moving to Nashville, I started doing more finger-style stuff, listening to Townes Van Zandt and Guy Clark and some of Steve Earle's stuff, and Willis Allen Ramsey, who was a big inspiration for me on this particular album. That album was supposed to be my Willis Allen Ramsey album, and it came out way too hillbilly for that. But it made me want to play more involved guitar instead of just sitting up there strumming three chords in the truth like you do with traditional country a lot of the times. I started turning a corner there, and then the longer I've been in Nashville, the more I've sort of gotten away from that and kind of coming full circle and headed back towards these British folk guys and open tunings and all that I liked so much when I was in school. So yeah, it's been a neat trip, all things considered.
I got to say, Matt, when I first connected with you a few weeks ago and listening to your songs and this album, I was so excited to meet you because on one hand, your voice is familiar for some reason, and the melodies and the tunes are familiar, but it's so unique. It's like you're this like combination of Jimmy Rogers and Dwight Yoakam, and like whoever. I mean, it's so different.
I'll take all of that I can get.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And what I'd like to do is spend a couple minutes on some of these songs.
Sure.
I've got some of the lyrics, and we'll start with the opening track. It's called "Birds of Crenshaw County."
Right.
I'm going to read a few of the lyrics, and if you could just expand on the backstory and whatnot. I think maybe it's part of this origin story that you mentioned too about your family. These are incredible lines. So it's Birds of Crenshaw County, and it goes like this. Me and Hazel Carver Jenkins barreling down a county road towards the Beaver Pond Grocery, living fast and flying low. And Hazel's cradling a pistol. She's looking like a bird of prey in a town full of buzzards spinning round, waiting on Judgment Day. Mm-hmm. And it gets better. Actually, the next verse is, I've listened to this so many times. I'm like, where in the world does this come from? The old man and his lady were living in a room around the back. Around the 4th of every July, they made all the money they could stack. On black cats and Roman candles, folks raining fire all over town. People here in Crenshaw County love to see a pretty thing burn out. Mm.
Yeah.
Where in the world does that come from?
All right, so Crenshaw County, if you drive down here from Nashville, you go through there. And let's see, Luverne is, I think, maybe the county seat. I'm not sure. Or Brantley. And then Brundage is in there, too. But tiny little area, not a whole lot going on. Really small little towns. But that's where my great-grandparents essentially and my great-great-grandparents set up. And they have a little house not far from Luverne that's still standing. It's condemned, but they still own the land and everything there. That was their stomping ground, and my great-uncle, Homer was his name, he had this little general store, and it was called the Beaver Pond Grocery, and I could not tell you exactly where it was. I know it's since been taken down. When I was a kid, some of my earliest memories walking in this place, he and my great aunt both chewed tobacco, and they had spittoons in the house. And there was always a space heater on full blast around Christmas time, and they'd have football on TV. But they lived like their house was essentially attached to the store, like it was part of the store, and so they just lived in the back. And they always gave me firecrackers, like that was the thing they'd send me home with. A lot of that comes from them. Now, the part about the buzzards, my hometown, Bainbridge, over the past several years, I guess, has become a buzzard roost, and I don't know why.
Oh my God.
These things, I had a video on my phone. I should have saved it the last time I was home for Christmas. I mean, they fly around in clouds. And if anything is dead anywhere in town, you can pinpoint exactly where, because these things, I mean, just in droves. And there's a water tower, and you can pass by the water tower on the bypass or whatever and look up, and they're all perched, completely surrounding this thing, and they're just sitting there, and I thought, it's like they're passing judgment on everybody.
Yeah, seriously.
But that's, and some of that small town people too can be a little judgy sometimes.
So who's Hazel?
I honestly just made her up.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I always loved the name Hazel. And I'm big on rhyme and meter, on making sure everything matches, or trying to anyway. And Hazel Carver Jenkins just made sense. But yeah, the whole thing is about, like I say, an attempted robbery. And the robbery never happened.
Yeah, it's like a Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. And it just sort of came together that way. But yeah, I think I had the riff first. And if you listen to Willis Allen Ramsey's only done one album, and it's legendary, especially among the Americana crowd.
Right.
You talk to anybody, Kelly Willis, any of these other folks around here, and bring up his name, they will have plenty to tell you. There's a song he does called Satin Sheets, which Waylon Jennings ended up covering, a bunch of the stuff from his album, a bunch of those songs got covered. I think almost every song on there. Anyway, I think the riff comes from listening to Satin Sheets, because he plays that in open G, and I always loved open G. So, but yeah, I had the riff first, and then just started writing down the story as it came to me.
I mean, it's incredible.
Well, thank you. It was fun to write. That wasn't one of the difficult ones.
Yeah. What about, is it Calcimine Blue?
So Calcimine it's sort of a type of like whitewash that used to be used a lot more often. Nowadays, we don't use it because we have latex paint. It's a lot tougher. But the first house we lived in, my roommate and I, in Nashville, East Nashville, had a dirt cellar down below the house. And I had a motorcycle, and I would keep the motorcycle down in the dirt cellar, and I'd work out down there sometimes and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time down there. And they had buckets of paint, just spare paint, sitting up on these shelves on the wall. And one of them, the shade of it was called Calcimine Blue. And so I looked it up, found out, calcimine is this pale color blue. It's like whitewash, but it's like sky blue. And the living room was painted that color in that house. And it's just sort of sitting there in that house day after day on my days off, like trying to write. And that color was always there. That just sort of materialized.
So these stories from your kind of the family heritage, are you trying to convey a meaning? Is there a lesson here, or are they just kind of stories that?
Not really. I just, like you say, especially back then, just loved telling a good story. I was never one of those people. A lot of my favorite bands, the post-punk bands and a lot of the English folk guys, they wrote, some of them in these abstract terms. And I'm sure you've heard the quote before that the best poetry is open to interpretation, by the reader. And I'm paraphrasing there, but
Right.
and I wanted to write more like that, man, but I was just so linear,
Right.
and so stories just made sense to
Yeah.
me. Like that's the direction I ended up sort of getting pushed in. But
What's the story behind Castle Mine Blue? Is that what story is that trying to tell?
man, I think that's an ex-girlfriend song, and that was it wasn't really much of a relationship. It was an infatuation, really, that I tried desperately to date this girl for 3 weeks or so. It just didn't work out, and this is really nobody's fault. But it took me forever to get over that. I just knew she was the one. She was the fish that got away, the big one. And for years it bothered me, and I blamed myself. But then eventually, you know how things fade, and you almost begin to miss that. It's like, oh, all these terrible feelings and all that, as crazy as that may seem, it's like as soon as they start to fade, you begin to, wait a minute, where'd that go?
Right.
And that's sort of what that one is about. When you're just sort of left, well, you're not hurting anymore, not really, not like you were by any means, but you're just sort of drained, and you kind of feel sort of empty and diminished. And that one, that's more along, I guess that's what I was going for there.
Well, so this first album, you made a comment earlier about it. You have like a whole life to sort of put the first album together.
Oh, yeah.
And then the next one may be a bit more challenging. Are you working on another album?
Man, this will be the third gig I've played all year. Like, this year was supposed to be slated as the writing year, because I really wanted to put out another album within a year of when the first one got released, and try and keep that momentum and set a precedent for myself, a goal of just, always writing and always being productive. But I went down a huge rabbit hole with the whole English folk thing, and that was fun. It really was. I loved it. And it led to a lot of guitar parts being figured out and things like that, a lot of melodies, but not a whole lot of lyrics. I've sort of come to realize you can sit around and noodle on a guitar and you'll find things that you like, and that's great. But I think, and I didn't understand this until now, you have to be living, in order to have things to write about. You got to get out into the world and experience things, and it's tough to sit at home and make up songs. I'm almost never happy with them when that happens. That's why the first one was so much easier, was because I had something to write about. When you just post up in your house, all right, well, I'm gonna write a whole album. That got tougher. I did get better at being abstract, though, and writing more sort of like in a poetry style, which I'm happy about. But
how do you get to that point?
Desperation, I think, not having stories to tell. It's like there went my crutch. All right, I've told almost every story I got worth telling. And we all say that. The truth is, you have that conversation with somebody else, and they'll bring up 3 stories that you've never utilized that are totally worth telling, and you don't even think about it. But there's got to be, for me, a lot of times, like an emotional attachment there, something like that, some sort of watermark, so that I remember, oh, okay, yeah, that was a rough time, or that was a great time, or whatever. So, we all have material that we can use. It's just that it doesn't always show up on your doorstep, and that's where couch time comes in. Like, you just kind of have to sit there and think, which is not the most pleasant thing in the world.
Well, you've mentioned a few different genres that you've experimented with or have been into. We're at a festival. If you had carte blanche to put together an evening lineup at a festival with 4 or 5 acts, what would that look like?
Oh, man, well, to lead, you got to have Radiohead in there somewhere. That is contrary to the style of music I play and everything we talked about. They are my favorite band of my generation. My living years, I listen to more of their stuff than anybody else, and it's always fascinated me. And they're one of those bands that I feel like you sort of have to. It's almost like a project. When they release a new album, it's almost like homework. Like for me anyway, I have to bring it home and I got to live with it for a while and sort of try and make sense of it. Some of them are more user-friendly than others. They'd have to be in there somewhere. And I would love, God, I'd love to have seen Nick Drake just once. You know what I mean?
Sure.
That would have been great. You know, Nick Jones is still around, but he had this terrible car accident back in the early 80s, and he has never been able to quite play the guitar the way that he did before. If you could get pre-80s, late 60s, mid-70s Nick Jones, then it's funny, too, they have recordings from folk clubs from like 1973, 1974 in the UK that they've posted on YouTube, and you can actually hear the guy from back then. They don't have any live video or anything. But
who's closing it out? Is it Radiohead or is it?
Oh yeah, I mean Radiohead's definitely they're the headliner, like I say, because you don't want Radiohead playing and then putting the folk act up there. That'd be a real problem. Nobody's gonna follow those guys.
Yeah.
What else? There's a band called the Chameleons that I really liked. They were from a post-punk group from Manchester back in the 80s, and sort of along the lines of Interpol or Joy Division or something like that.
Yeah, that's good. All right.
I was going to say, so you get 2 folk acts and you get 2 rock acts, and
That's
everybody's happy.
All right.
Probably not, but...
So a couple more questions. In terms of where you're at in your career and your aspirations, do you think about, hey, I want to be known as an artist that is blank? Like, do you consciously want to have intention around that, or is it like, hey, I just want to make good music that I like, and then if people like it, so be it?
You kind of summed it up right there, man. Considering how anxious I was about even coming down for this thing, like, can you imagine me on the road? I would die. I would never make it. I'd be a head case. I already am, so it would just make it worse. It'd be a downward spiral. I wouldn't mind tour in the UK at some point, because that's where so many of my influences come from, and they love a lot of American roots music, country blues, and story songs like are on that album, and traditional country even. But that and the Southeast are all I really care to. I feel like I've seen most of the country in one capacity or another. It's mostly getting this stuff out of my system and putting it down. The recording is important because I want a record of that,
Where do you think the anxiety comes from?
Man, I've never done well under pressure. I was a kicker in high school, and can you imagine?
You're a field goal kicker?
Awful. Yeah. Yeah, terrible.
I
was the worst, maybe in Decatur County history. When I was a sophomore, the guy that we had, I didn't even play football. I was a baseball guy. And they said, hey, look, we know your dad taught you how to punt, when you were a kid. Dad was a punter and a quarterback. And it's like, we want you to punt, but we want you to learn how to kick. And so it's like, I was a sophomore. I was like, all right, man,
there's no pressure in
I was going to say, I'll do the best I can, but I don't know. They sent me to camp at Auburn. I kicked at Jordan Hare, on the field and everything. I actually made it to the finals of the thing, but learned a lot in a short amount of time, and I loved it. It was a lot of fun. But kicking in an empty stadium versus kicking in a full stadium, 2 different things. When you got 11 guys coming at you, that's awful, and a crowd full of people watching. So I don't know. That was my first inkling that maybe I'm not the guy that likes to be in front of a crowd. For me, the writing and the recording was always what I enjoyed the most. That's where all the payoff was. The live performances, they always just made me curl up into a little ball, So, and I've gotten better, at it, but it's never easy. It's never easy.
To wrap things up, so the inspiration for this podcast has a lot to do with music, but it's also about Ted Lasso and the mindset, positivity, curiosity. He deals with some anxiousness with his panic attacks. You've seen the show. What are some of your takeaways from either the show itself, a certain character? What are some of the themes for you personally?
I don't know. I wish I could have been on his team. I wish I had a coach like that. You know what I mean? I've never known a coach like that. I'll tell you that much.
What about the character sticks out at you?
To be honest, he's just he's so encouraging. You know, everything has a silver lining, and that's the way it's always been with that guy. It seemed like through the series, there's always something we can take away from this, some positive aspect, you know, or learning experience we can get. And you know, and that's a great thing. Like I say, my dad was more of a John Wayne guy, you know, like,
Right.
you know, which classic Southern coach, and that has its advantages too. They fire you up, you know. Right. It's more about like some of these old Southern preachers. They yell and they scream, and it gets you excited, you know. Or Kirby Smart, like, you know, see him doing locker room speeches. You know, it's like no wonder.
Yeah,
you know?
seriously.
I mean, this dude's inspiring people, but I don't know. I always like Danny Rojas. Danny Rojas is my favorite.
Football's life.
Yeah, I mean, how could he not be? He's endless positivity. He's got tons of energy. He is youth, and he's also a really hard worker and well-mannered, and, you know, knows who he is, knows where he comes from. I mean, he's the perfect guy. You want that dude on your team, you know.
Well, for this conversation, I think what's relevant to me, that what comes to mind is, it's kind of cheesy, but the whole believe sign, you know, above the door. Yes, there's tactics in soccer. There's probably tactics with music. You know, how do you write lyrics? How do you strum a guitar? There's technical aspects that you need to know. But when it comes down to it, it's actually self-confidence. It's belief. It's, when I see this in corporate world, do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just, from a point of vulnerability, have never. You know, that's one of the things that always plagued me. You know, like I say, being in pressure situations and things like that, if you are confident with a certain song or whatever, overwhelmingly, you know, most of the time anyway, you're going to play that well, no matter what. And if you're not, man, it's crazy what your mind can do, how it can work against you. And so I think that's everything. I agree.
Yeah. Well, for what it's worth, you should have every reason to believe.
Well, I sure appreciate it.
I mean, seriously. You said something on Instagram, and I commented. I'm like, I think you're going to own this festival.
Oh, man.
Because you have such a unique voice and perspective, and I'd love if you played a couple songs. Are you cool with that?
Yeah, sure, man.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so this is Birds of Crenshaw County. Me and Hayes were Carver Jenkins barreling down a county road towards a beaver pond grocery. We're living fast and flying low. And Hayes was cradling a pistol. She's looking like a bird of prey. In a town full of buzzards sitting around waiting on the judgment day. Well, I knew we would be undone if we could not escape the broad and surly bonds of Crenshaw County. The old man is lady, living in a room around the back. Around the 4th of every July, making all the money they could stack. Black cats and Roman candles, and folks raining fire all over town. People here in Crenshaw County love to see a pretty thing burn down. And she was a picture to behold, a flower left wet in the cold. Hazel smiled and made an entrance. She walks right through the double doors. While they waved around that pistol, took the old lady to her court. And the hammer fell without a whisper. The old lady wheeled and moaned. And then her husband cleared a corner, carrying 2 barrels of his own. Poor Hazel fell where she stood, and I crawled out the back into the woods. Staring up through the trees in a lucid dream fading into Hazel's arms, warm waiting. And I was always big into mythology, and so Shelley's got a long poem, Prometheus Unbound, I think is what it's called. And so I don't know, I always liked the story of Prometheus and all that stuff, so I wrote this one after I saw this lady in this bar one night, and she was just, knockout. And I saw her walk across this dance floor, and it was just something to behold. It really was. But yeah, I went home and I was like, all right, here it is. And so yeah, it just goes to show you you have to be out and you got to be living in order to have something to write about. All right, this is called Poor Prometheus. For Prometheus did say, here's a flame to light your weary path, and with his pain he paid. Not content to curse the darkness, I beheld its glow tonight. Maybe for the first time, oh, she carries it so high, a beacon for this lonely world to guide. To guide. Now to see her cross the floor is to see a clipper sailing. She's a bearer of the torch, with a flaxen banner waving. Oh, how sharp and smooth she glides. Oh, the boards of ancient harbor row, I tremble at the sight. So wondrous and so terrible to see. To see. She seeks no port in storm or gale. Spring's blessed glory she does pale. For she Olympus cannot change. She does bright Phoebus put to shame. Now Prometheus rejoice, for your gift it is not wasted, and although you suffer still, as the dreaded eagle rages, there is one who serves you well. One mortal yet would bear your flame, and I would live to tell. I've seen her with these poor and wretched these eyes.
Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Curious Goldfish. Please follow and subscribe to the podcast and on social media. Also, tell your music-loving friends about us too. Until next time, stay curious.